The fire crackles softly in the headmaster's study, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. Albus Dumbledore settles into his armchair, a lifetime of memories resting just behind his twinkling eyes. He has decided to share his story tonight, not as a lecture, but as a quiet tale for a peaceful evening. To revisit these moments, however, means to confront his greatest wisdom alongside his most profound regrets. By the end of this journey, you will understand the complete man behind the legend, from a brilliant, ambitious boy to the wise wizard who shaped a world. I wonder where you are listening from and what the local time is for you right now. What is the true cost of a single, fateful choice? A young boy's future was being packed away inside a worn leather trunk. Albus Dumbledore, not yet the sage with a long silver beard, but a brilliant and ambitious teenager, arranged his spellbooks with a precision that felt like control. Each carefully folded robe and each neatly stacked volume was a deliberate step away from the quiet, painful shadows of Godric's Hollow. His family name, once whispered with pity after a tragic incident involving his sister, Ariana, was a weight he was determined to leave behind. The towering halls of Hogwarts represented more than an education. They were a promise of a life defined by intellect and achievement, not by sorrow. Yet this very ambition created a quiet, constant tension within the walls of his own home. His sister, her magical nature left fragile and unstable by a childhood trauma, required a gentle, protected existence. The decision to leave for school was not a simple one. It was a choice between the family's pressing needs and the call of his own luminous potential. Could he truly justify pursuing his own brilliance when his presence offered a measure of stability for Ariana? The piercing whistle of the Hogwarts Express was not merely a sound, it was an answer. As the steam clouded the platform, a new chapter was beginning, one where the pursuit of knowledge would forever be intertwined with the weight of a choice made. The worn leather stool felt small beneath him. A sea of young faces watched from 4 long tables, their candles flickering in the enchanted ceiling above. For a brilliant boy used to the quiet shadows of home, this was an exposure both terrifying and exhilarating. The old sorting hat was placed upon his head, its brim drooping over his eyes. A voice, not in his ears but within his mind, began to speak. It saw the sharp intellect, a mind already weaving complex magical theories. It saw the raw ambition, a deep and powerful desire to make his mark upon the world, to escape the confines of a tragic family name. The hat whispered of Slytherin, a house that could hone that cunning and guide that ambition to greatness. It was a path of pure power, and for a fleeting moment, Albus felt its allure. But then he thought of the books in his trunk, the joy of unraveling a magical mystery for its own sake. He thought of the loneliness of his summer and the deep, human need for true companionship. He did not want a greatness built on isolation. He chose, internally and decisively, a different kind of strength. He valued the shared pursuit of knowledge and the bravery of genuine connection over the solitary pursuit of raw influence. The hat considered his choice, respected it, and then its voice boomed through the hall for all to hear. Gryffindor. The cheer from the red and gold table was immediate and warm. Hands clapped him on the back as he joined his new housemates, the weight of his name momentarily forgotten in that wave of welcome. It was his first true taste of camaraderie, a bond that would shape his entire life. Yet, as he looked across the hall to the Slytherin table, he could not help but feel a quiet acknowledgement of the path not taken. His first steps into the Great Hall had revealed more than a world of wonder. They had revealed the first true map of his own soul, a terrain where the love for his friends would forever be the brightest guiding star. The library became his sanctuary, a world of quiet whispers and endless possibility. Among the towering shelves, Albus found more than just knowledge. He found a companion. Elphias Doge, a boy with a quiet demeanor and a stutter that made him hesitant to speak in crowds, often sat alone in a corner. Albus saw not a social outcast, but a mind brimming with curious insights. He approached him not with pity, but with a shared question about the ethical paradoxes of a complex transfiguration text. Their friendship was not born of grand adventure, but of hushed debates over cauldron fumes and the shared rustle of parchment. Elphias possessed a cautious, methodical approach to magic, while Albus's mind leaped ahead to breathtaking, often radical, possibilities. This difference in temperament sparked their first true test. They were debating the foundational principles of a proposed international statute on magical experimentation. Albus argued passionately for the advancement of magical knowledge, seeing restrictive laws as barriers to progress. Elphias, however, focused on the potential for harm, the unintended consequences on magical creatures, and even the wizards themselves. The intellectual clash was intense. Albus knew his arguments were logically superior, his grasp of the subject undeniable. He could have easily dismantled Elphias's more cautious stance. But he saw the genuine concern in his friend's eyes, a worry born not from a lack of understanding, but from a deep care for the world. In that moment, Albus made a choice. He set aside the need to be right. He listened, truly listened, and acknowledged the profound validity in Elphias's perspective. He realized that true wisdom was not just about seeing the furthest horizon, but also about understanding the ground beneath their feet. That single act of empathy, of valuing his friend's heart over his own intellectual victory, forged a bond stronger than any magical oath. Their plans for a grand tour after graduation, a journey to uncover magical secrets across the globe, were built on this foundation of mutual respect. It was a lesson in loyalty that would one day be tested by far greater fires, a quiet understanding that the strength of a friendship could be the most powerful magic of all. The polished corridors of the Ministry of Magic felt a world away from the dusty comfort of the Hogwarts library. It was on a school trip, a rare glimpse into the working heart of the wizarding world, that Albus found himself separated from the group for just a moment. A heavy, unmarked door, left slightly ajar, beckoned him into a darkness that seemed to swallow the light. This was the Department of Mysteries. Curiosity, that ever-present guide, pulled him forward into a room of impossible scale. He stood in a cavernous space, colder than any dungeon, where the only light came from the soft, blue glow of countless orbs resting on endless shelves. The silence here was not empty, but thick and humming, as if he were standing inside a great, slumbering mind. This was the Hall of Prophecy. One silvery sphere, sitting at eye level, seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light. It bore no name he recognized, yet it felt as though it were calling to him. He knew he should not, but the temptation was too great. His fingers brushed the glassy surface, and a whisper, thin and ethereal, filled the air around him. It spoke of a great wizard, a power unseen for generations, and a destiny intertwined with the wizarding world itself. It was only a fragment, a single piece of a vast puzzle, but it was enough. The words seared themselves into his memory. Leaving the hall, the fragment of prophecy echoed in his thoughts, igniting a deep and restless fascination. Was the future a river with a fixed course, or could a determined will change its flow? This was not a simple question of academic debate. It struck at the very core of his beliefs. He had always championed the power of choice, the strength of free will, to overcome any obstacle, even the shadows of a difficult past. Yet the prophecy suggested a different kind of power, a pull of fate that could not be ignored. This internal conflict did not dampen his ambition, it fueled it. His quest for knowledge escalated, no longer just for the joy of discovery, but driven by a need to understand the very mechanisms of destiny itself. He left the ministry that day with far more questions than answers, carrying a secret that would shape his studies and his path for decades to come. The polished floors of the Hogwarts corridors were usually a place of bustling student life, but today they felt like a stage. A tall, arrogant boy from a prominent pure blood family had cornered a younger student, his voice dripping with contempt as he mocked the boy's struggling attempt at a simple charm. Albus watched for only a moment, the memory of his own sister's fragile state flashing in his mind. He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm, and asked the bully to stop. The older boy, Gellert, turned his sneer on Albus, deriding his famous name and his association with what he called lesser wizards. The challenge was issued not with a shout, but with a cold, formal tone. A duel right there in the corridor. A crowd gathered, their whispers creating a tense, humming atmosphere. Gellert did not hesitate, firing a stinging hex that crackled through the air. Albus deflected it with a silent, almost lazy flick of his wand. He could have responded in kind, or with something far worse, something that would have truly humiliated his opponent. The darker spells he had read about whispered in the back of his mind, promising a swift and total victory. But he thought of Elphias and of the younger student, now watching him with wide, hopeful eyes. Power was not the point, protection was. As Gellert prepared another, more aggressive jinx, Albus did not attack. Instead, he twisted his wand in a complex, flowing motion. Brilliant, silken cords shot from its tip, not to cause pain, but to wrap around Gellert, binding his arms to his sides and gently lowering him to the floor, completely immobilized but entirely unharmed. The silence in the corridor was absolute. He had not defeated his rival, he had simply stopped him, with a spell so advanced and so precisely controlled that it demonstrated a gap in skill that was almost artistic. The consequence was immediate. He saw respect in the eyes of his peers, a new, weighty kind of attention. But he also saw the burning envy in Gellert's eyes from the floor, a deep and lasting resentment. This single choice, to use his power for restraint rather than revenge, cemented his reputation. He was no longer just a brilliant student. He was a figure of moral strength, a wizard to be watched. And with that raised status came a heavier burden, for every future action would now be measured against this new standard he had set for himself. The owl arrived not with a gentle hoot, but with a frantic beating of wings, against the great hall's enchanted ceiling. It swooped low over the Gryffindor table, dropping a scarlet envelope directly onto Albus's plate of toast. The chatter and clatter of breakfast ceased in an instant. A howler, it did not wait for him to open it. His mother's voice, strained and desperate, filled the hall, speaking words that would cleave his world in two. Kendra was gone. The letter burst into flames, leaving only cold ash and a silence more deafening than any shout. There was no time for shock, no moment for grief. His academic triumphs, his grand plans with Elphias, the brilliant future he had so carefully constructed, all of it vanished in that single, fiery moment. He was on his feet, moving as if in a trance, his only thought to get home. The train ride to Godric's Hollow was a blur of green fields that seemed to mock him with their normalcy. He arrived to a house that was no longer a home, just a shell holding the echoes of a life that was over. His brother Aberforth stood in the doorway, his face a mask of accusation and raw pain. The responsibility for their fragile sister, Ariana, now fell squarely onto Albus's shoulders. The brilliant student, the boy destined for greatness, was gone, replaced by a caretaker, a guardian trapped in the very place he had fought so hard to escape. Every attempt to maintain order, every decision about Ariana's care, was met with Aberforth's simmering resentment. His younger brother saw not a sacrifice, but an abandonment, a belief that Albus had always valued his books and his fame over his own family. This was the new, terrible conflict that would define his days. His personal ambitions were not merely postponed, they were locked away in a trunk, seemingly forever. The stakes of his future were no longer measured in academic accolades or magical discoveries, but in the fragile peace of a grieving household. He had returned a son, and in an instant, he had become a parent, his own path forever bent by a loss that reshaped the very core of who he was meant to be. The summer air in Godric's Hollow was thick with the scent of blooming flowers and unspoken frustration. For Albus, each day was a study in quiet containment, his brilliant mind pacing within the confines of his family's cottage like a caged bird. Then, into this stillness, came a whirlwind of charisma and intellect named Gellert Grindelwald. He was a distant relative of Bathilda Bagshot, the local historian, and he arrived with a mind as sharp and restless as Albus' own. Their first conversation was not a simple greeting, but a sudden and intense collision of ideas that lit a fire in the dim parlor. They debated magical theory, the nature of power, and the stagnation they both perceived in the wider wizarding world. For the first time since his mother's passing, Albus felt truly seen, his intellect not just acknowledged but challenged and celebrated. Gellert did not see a trapped caretaker. He saw an equal, a partner. Their bond formed with the speed and intensity of a lightning strike, a shared vision of a new world order built for the benefit of all magical folk, a world free from the secrecy that forced them into hiding. They called this vision the greater good. The phrase became their mantra, a noble-sounding banner under which any action could be justified. This alliance was a thrilling escape from his grim reality, a chance to use his immense gifts for a purpose that felt grand and historic. Yet, even as their plans grew more elaborate, a quiet conflict stirred within Albus. The allure of this shared dream was powerful, a siren song promising purpose and power beyond his wildest academic aspirations. He was tempted by the sheer scale of their ambition, the chance to reshape the world with Gellert at his side, but he could not completely silence the whisper of doubt, the part of him that remembered the cost of restraint and the value of protecting the vulnerable. Their decision to collaborate fully was not a slow drift, but a deliberate escalation. They began to explore magics that most wizards would never dare to study, their research fueled by a belief that their ends justified any means. The summer air did not just feel warm, it crackled with the energy of their revolutionary magic and their dangerous, intoxicating ambition. In choosing to walk this path with Gellert, Albus was making the most fateful choice of his life, one that would force him to weigh the abstract ideal of a greater good against the very real, very human consequences of his actions. The vial was small enough to fit in the palm of his hand, a delicate silver instrument that seemed to pulse with a soft, golden light. In a moment of fervent idealism, Albus and Gellert had used it to mix a single drop of their blood, a magical binding that made their shared dream feel as permanent as the stars. They swore an oath, a vow sealed not just with words, but with the very essence of their lives, that they would never raise a wand against one another. It was a promise that felt like strength, a symbol of their unbreakable partnership in the quest for the greater good. For Albus, the pact offered a profound, if false, sense of security. It allowed him to believe that the dangerous magics they discussed, the radical plans they devised, could never truly lead to a conflict between them. This magical bond blinded him to the darker implications of their path, creating a shelter where his doubts could not fully penetrate. He saw only the brilliant future they would build together, not the horrific means that might be required to achieve it. The small, glowing vial became the physical representation of his ultimate internal conflict, a conflict between his deep affection for the only person who truly understood his mind and the growing unease about the methods their revolution would inevitably employ. He hid the pact away with a heavy heart, a secret locked deep within his belongings. With that single action, the stakes for the entire wizarding world were quietly and irrevocably tied to a tiny, shining object, a testament to a choice made in the heat of summer that would one day demand a price colder than winter. The argument began not with a shout, but with a terrible, cold tension. Aberforth had returned home early and found Gellert in the house, his presence a constant, simmering provocation. The confrontation was immediate, a long brewing storm finally breaking over the care of their sister. Aberforth accused Albus of being blind, of prioritizing his dangerous new friend and their grand plans over Ariana's fragile well-being. Gellert, in turn, dismissed Aberforth as a sentimental obstacle to their glorious future. The words grew sharper, more venomous, until someone reached for a wand. The first spell was not a curse, but a flash of red light that shattered a vase. Then the world dissolved into chaos. In the cramped space of the sitting room, 3 wizards dueled, their spells ricocheting off the walls in a storm of misguided light and raw emotion. Albus was caught in the middle, his mind screaming for a way to stop the madness, his heart torn between his brother and the friend who had become his other half. He saw a stray jinx, a flicker of violent energy, flying not toward an opponent, but toward the corner where Ariana had been watching, her eyes wide with a fear she could not comprehend. He moved without thought, his own body a shield, his wand rising to deflect the harm. But in that terrible, confused moment, with spells crossing from every direction, the The magic that struck her was not the one he had tried to block. It was another, wild and unaimed, and its touch was fatal. The duel ended not with a victor, but with a silence more devastating than any spell. Ariana lay still. In that single, shattering instant, the dream of the greater good, the grand plans, the intoxicating partnership, all of it turned to dust. The only thing that remained was the unbearable truth. He had failed to protect her. The choice that followed was the most agonizing of his life. He looked from his sister's resting form to Gellert, who stood amidst the wreckage, and he saw not a visionary, but the architect of this horror. The bond was broken, not by the magical pact, but by a grief so profound it erased everything else. He told Gellert to leave, and he never saw him again. The weight of responsibility settled upon him, a burden he would carry for the rest of his days. He had buried his mother, and now he buried his sister and his dreams alongside her, left alone in a quiet house with a brother whose grief was a mirror of his own. From that day forward, the brilliant, ambitious boy was gone, replaced by a man who understood that the greatest power was not in reshaping the world, but in bearing the cost of its broken pieces. The quiet halls of Hogwarts offered a different kind of silence than the one in Godric's Hollow. This silence was not empty, but filled with the gentle hum of learning and the soft echoes of young lives beginning to unfold. Albus Dumbledore returned to the castle not as a triumphant student, but as a man seeking refuge in the very place that had once promised him escape. He accepted the post of Transfiguration Master, a role that demanded not grand political visions, but patient, daily dedication. His classroom became his sanctuary, a place where the precise, elegant magic of changing one thing into another offered a semblance of order in a world he felt he had thrown into chaos. He did not simply teach the textbook, he brought transfiguration to life, demonstrating how a simple matchstick could become a needle not through rote instruction, but by revealing the beautiful, inherent flexibility of the world itself. His passion was infectious, and his students soon found themselves not just memorizing spells, but understanding the very principles that held magic together. Meanwhile, late into the night, his private research into alchemy became a parallel path of atonement. Publishing under pseudonyms at first, he and his partner Nicholas Flamel produced groundbreaking papers on the nature of matter and the philosophical implications of transformation. For Albus, alchemy was not merely about creating gold or an elixir of life. It was a deeply personal metaphor, a study in how something base and flawed could, through immense effort and purification, be transformed into something noble. Every lesson taught, every paper published, was a quiet rebuttal to the dangerous allure of the greater good. He was building something real and lasting, not through domination, but through nurturing minds and contributing to the collective knowledge of the wizarding world. His internal conflict, however, never truly subsided. The guilt was a constant, low hum beneath his calm exterior, a private burden that fueled his public generosity. He saw Ariana's face in every struggling student, and he dedicated himself to ensuring that no other young life would be shattered by careless ambition or ideological fervor. This profound sense of responsibility slowly rebuilt his reputation, not as a political firebrand, but as the wisest and most compassionate wizard of his age. He became a mentor, a guide, his office door always open to any student in need of advice or comfort. And as his stature grew within the safe walls of the castle, a new darkness was rising far beyond its borders. The name Gellert Grindelwald began to appear in the newspapers, no longer a theorist, but a revolutionary, his movement gathering strength and leaving a trail of fear across Europe. Albus would read these reports with a heavy heart, the weight of the unbreakable vow feeling more like a chain with every passing day. He had chosen a life of education over a life of power, yet the consequences of his youthful choices were now circling back, forcing him to wonder if his atonement would one day demand a far more terrible price. The official parchment arrived on his desk, its ministry seal a stark, red wound against the pale surface. It was not a request, but a desperate plea. The Wisengamot and the International Confederation of Wizards were united in their terror. Gellert Grindelwald was no longer a radical with a manifesto. He was a conqueror with an army, his rallies now punctuated not by debate, but by the disappearance of his opponents. They begged Albus Dumbledore, the only wizard whose name could inspire equal measures of hope and fear, to take up the mantle of their defender, to confront his oldest friend. Holding the heavy parchment, Albus felt the ghost of a summer long past, the memory of a tiny, glowing vial hidden away in his belongings, the Blood Pact. Its magic was absolute, an unbreakable vow that he would never raise his wand against Gellert. How could he explain to these frightened officials that the one man they believed could save them was magically forbidden from striking the decisive blow? His duty to the wizarding world, to all those innocent lives now trembling in the shadow of a war he helped inspire, screamed at him to act. Yet the magical vow, a promise made in a moment of fervent, foolish idealism, held him in a terrible, silent grip. This was the true price of his youthful choices, a dilemma that tore at the very core of who he had become. After days of tortured silence, his reply was a single, polite sentence of refusal. The shockwaves from the ministry were immediate. How could he stand by? Was he a coward? The panic only fueled Grindelwald's momentum, painting the resistance as leaderless and weak. Albus retreated into the profound quiet of his office, the portraits of former headmasters feigning sleep as they watched him pace. He could not break his vow, but he could not abandon the world to fire and tyranny. There had to be another path, a way to oppose the ideology without directly attacking the man. His brilliant mind, so accustomed to solving the most complex magical equations, now wrestled with a problem of its own creation, searching for an answer hidden somewhere between the lines of a promise he could not undo. The refusal to fight was a public act, but the private war began in the deepest shadows of the world's oldest libraries. Albus Dumbledore's study at Hogwarts became a map room of a different kind of battle, one fought not with wands, but with whispers and forgotten lore. His quest was a solitary, desperate secret, to find a magical means to break the unbreakable vow. He began his search in the restricted section, but those familiar texts offered only dead ends and grim confirmations of the Pact's legendary power. This was a magic built on the most profound trust, and its undoing would require something equally profound. His journey soon took him beyond the castle walls, a series of discreet absences explained away as research trips. He traveled to the hidden archives of ancient wizarding families in the Scottish Highlands, consulted with reclusive experts in Arctic Nordic observatories, and even sought the counsel of a silent order of monks in the Himalayas who studied the flow of magical bonds. Each location presented a new puzzle, a new fragment of hope that often dissolved upon closer inspection. The external conflict was constant, a quiet, dangerous game of cat and mouse. Grindelwald's followers, aware that their master's greatest threat was searching for a weakness, worked to thwart him at every turn. A library in Cairo he had planned to visit mysteriously burned to the ground. A potential informant in Prague vanished without a trace. These were not overt attacks, but chilling reminders that he was being watched, that his every move was anticipated by the very network of fear he had helped to create in his youth. This forced him into a crucial decision: to use his immense knowledge not for grand discovery or personal glory, but for a single, purely defensive purpose. His brilliant mind, which had once dreamed of reshaping the world, was now entirely focused on dismantling a single, terrible mistake. The escalating stakes transformed this personal mission into a matter of global survival. For as long as the pact held him in check, Grindelwald's reign of terror would continue unchecked. The breakthrough came not in a grand hall, but in a dusty, forgotten tome in a Portuguese bookshop run by a blind wizard. The text was a treatise on magical symbiosis, and tucked within a passage on the nature of unbreakable promises was a cryptic clue. It spoke of a rare magical creature, one whose very nature was to untangle the most intricate of magical weavings. It was not a spell or a potion, but a living key. The text named it the Killen, a beast of pure heart and profound insight, whose abilities could, in theory, perceive and dissolve a bond forged in misguided idealism. For the first time in years, Albus felt a flicker of genuine hope, a path forward that did not require breaking his vow through force, but healing it through a magic far older and wiser than his own. The search for the Killen was a long and lonely road, one that led him deep into the mist-shrouded valleys of a hidden mountain range. It was there, in a sanctuary untouched by wizards for centuries, that he found not the creature he sought, but another in desperate need. A brilliant flash of crimson and gold was caught in a vicious, thorny snare, a magical trap set by poachers. It was a phoenix, its song silenced by pain, its fiery wings tangled and dimming. Without a single thought for his own quest or his own safety, Albus fell to his knees. His wand moved not with the complex precision of a master wizard, but with the gentle, careful hands of a healer. He spoke in low, soothing tones, his magic unraveling the cruel vines one thread at a time, his only intent to end the creature's suffering. As the last thorn fell away, the phoenix looked at him, its dark, intelligent eyes seeing past the famous name and the heavy burdens, seeing directly into the heart of the man who had chosen compassion over ambition. In that silent, understanding gaze, a bond was forged. The phoenix, whom he would name Fawkes, let out a single, clear note and bowed its head, choosing Albus as its companion for life. It was not a conquest, but a gift, offered freely. Soon after, when a careless moment with a volatile potion left Albus's hand badly burned, Fawkes did not hesitate. The phoenix leaned forward, and a single, shining tear fell upon the wound. The pain vanished instantly, the skin healing without a scar, a physical manifestation of a magic that asked for nothing in return. This act of pure, selfless loyalty resolved a deep conflict that had churned within Albus since his sister's passing. For years, he had believed his greatest magic was born from his brilliant, calculating mind, or worse, from the terrible cost of his mistakes. Fawkes showed him a different truth, that the most powerful magic could spring from a simple, uncalculated act of kindness. His faith in the fundamental goodness of magic, a faith shattered in a Godric's hollow sitting room, was restored not by a grand theory, but by the gentle touch of a magical creature. This bond provided him with more than a powerful ally. It gave him the emotional strength to finally accept his destiny. With Fawkes perched calmly on his shoulder, the weight of his past felt a little lighter. He was no longer a man haunted by a single, terrible summer, but a wizard ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead, armed with a wisdom forged not only in sorrow, but in the restorative power of unconditional loyalty. The final confrontation did not take place on a grand battlefield, but within the cold, towering geometry of Grindelwald's own fortress. The air was thin and sharp, tasting of stone and old magic. Albus Dumbledore stood across from the man who had once been his closest friend, and the silence between them was heavier than any spell. Gellert Grindelwald's face was a mask of furious conviction, his eyes burning with the certainty of his cause. He raised his wand, not in a formal salute, but as a declaration of war, and the space between them erupted. The duel was not the fiery, chaotic explosion many would later imagine. It was a symphony of precision, a breathtaking and terrifying conversation between two minds that knew each other's deepest rhythms. Spells of immense power were not simply cast, they were woven together in complex counterpoints. Each enchantment met with an elegant and immediate negation. Albus did not attack with curses designed to maim or end a life. His magic was a work of containment, a brilliant and relentless application of force meant to disarm, to deflect, to encircle. He transfigured the very stone of the fortress into living barriers that gently absorbed violent hexes. He conjured shimmering, non-lethal nets of light that sought only to bind his opponent's wand arm. Every choice was a testament to his hard-won wisdom, a refusal to become the very thing he was fighting against. The climax arrived not with a killing blow, but with a moment of profound understanding. As Gellert unleashed a torrent of destructive energy, a spell born of pure ideological fury, Albus met it not with equal force, but with a single, simple, and utterly unexpected charm. The disarming charm, a jet of scarlet light, humble in its origin but immense in its purpose, cut through the storm of dark magic. It was not a spell of hatred, but of finality. It struck Gellert's wand, sending the instrument of so much suffering clattering to the floor. In that silent moment, as the last echoes of their conflict faded, the external struggle was over. The long, shadowed war that had gripped the wizarding world was finally at an end. The magical authorities moved in, securing Grindelwald for his permanent imprisonment in the prison he himself had built, a place called Nurmengard. As they led him away, Albus felt the heavy chains of his youthful vow finally fall away, not broken by force, but rendered moot by a choice to protect rather than to destroy. He had upheld his duty, choosing the safety of the world over the affections of his past. Peace descended across the global wizarding community, a collective sigh of relief after decades of fear. Yet, for the man who had secured it, there was no celebration, only a deep and weary understanding. He stood alone in the aftermath, the victor, the hero, but also the man who had, long ago, helped light the fuse to this very conflict. His victory was not sweet, it was sobering, a reminder that the greatest battles are often won not by conquering others, but by mastering the shadows within oneself. The official offer arrived on heavy, gilded parchment, sealed with the imposing crest of the Ministry of Magic. He was to be the next minister, the single most powerful wizard in Britain. The entire wizarding world held its breath, certain that the hero of their age would finally accept the mantle he so clearly deserved. How could he refuse the power to shape the very society he had just saved from tyranny? Yet Albus Dumbledore held the document with a quiet, knowing sadness. He saw the ornate chair in the minister's office not as a throne, but as a gilded cage, a place where the abstract ideals of governance could slowly poison a person's soul. He had felt that intoxication before, in the heat of a Godric's hollow summer, whispering about the greater good. He had seen its ultimate effect in the cold eyes of Gellert Grindelwald. Power, he had come to understand, was not a tool for him to wield, but a test he dared not take. His polite, unwavering refusal sent a shockwave through the community. Editorials were written questioning his sanity, his motives, even his loyalty. How could a wizard of such immense capability turn his back on the responsibility to lead? This single act of profound humility, of turning away from the very pinnacle of worldly influence, did more to cement his legendary status than any duel ever could. He was not interested in ruling from a distant office, issuing decrees that would be filtered through layers of bureaucracy and political compromise. His true calling was far more personal and far more difficult. He chose instead to be a guide, a mentor, a steady hand in the background. By refusing ultimate power, he gained a different kind of influence, one built on trust and wisdom rather than fear and authority. And so he returned to the one place that had always offered him true sanctuary, the ancient stone walls of Hogwarts. The castle was more than a school to him. It was a living, breathing entity that welcomed him home without judgment. The familiar scent of polished wood and old parchment, the gentle chatter of portraits as he passed, the soft glow of lantern light in the corridors. This was the environment where he could truly make a difference, one young mind at a time. He walked back through the gates not as a conqueror, but as a teacher, carrying with him the quiet conviction that the most important battles are not fought for a title, but for the future of the students who called this castle home. The polished oak of his new desk as headmaster felt solid beneath his hands, a comforting anchor in a world still healing. Yet the reports that crossed it spoke of a different kind of unease, one that began not in foreign ministries, but in a quiet corner of London. A boy, an orphan, was displaying a peculiar and troubling control over his circumstances, a power that felt instinctively, dangerously magical. Albus knew this required a personal touch. The journey to Wool's orphanage was a descent into a different kind of silence, one of scuffed linoleum and faint disinfectant, a world stripped of warmth and wonder. He met Tom Riddle in a sparse, sunlit room that did little to dispel the chill. The boy was too handsome, too still, his politeness a perfect, polished mask. He spoke of making animals hurt because they deserved it, of taking things that were not his voice calm and devoid of any childish remorse. He already saw his magic as a tool for dominance, a means to instill fear and reclaim a sense of power he felt the world had denied him. In those cool, calculating eyes, Albus did not see a monster, but something far more perilous, a brilliant and wounded soul already choosing to walk in shadow. This was not like the fiery, ideological ambition of Grindelwald. This was a coldness that started from within, a corruption of the self that could one day corrupt everything it touched. The decision was immediate and heavy. He would bring the boy to Hogwarts, to the one place that might still offer a chance at redemption, but he would never look away. He would keep a close, cautious watch, a guardian not just of the boy's education, but of the world he might one day threaten, as he offered Tom his place, guiding him onto the path that would define them both. He felt the stakes of the future shift silently into place. A new darkness was brewing, not in a foreign fortress, but in the heart of a child he was inviting into his own home. And in that moment, Albus Dumbledore understood that his greatest battle might not be against an old friend, but against a potential he himself had just unlocked. The quiet of the headmaster's study was now filled with a different kind of work. As whispers of Lord Voldemort's return grew louder, a chilling theory began to form in Albus Dumbledore's mind. What if the Dark Lord's power was not merely political or even magical, but something far more unnatural? The concept of a Horcrux, a subject so dark it was barely a footnote in the most restricted texts, presented a terrifying possibility. It was a magic that fractured the soul itself, anchoring a person to life through an act of profound violation. To even suspect this was to stare into an abyss of inhumanity. His search began not with grand pronouncements, but in the deepest silences of the world. He journeyed to forgotten caves where the very air seemed to resist life, his wand the only light against a darkness that felt ancient and watchful. He sought out ancient, reclusive beings, like the mer people in the black-locked depths, and the reclusive centaur herds in their sacred forest clearings, speaking with them in low, respectful tones about old magics and hidden places. Each expedition was a physical trial, a reminder that his once boundless energy was now a finite resource. His hand, blackened and pained from a cursed ring, was a constant companion on these trips, a stark testament to the dangers he faced and the price of knowledge. This forced a solemn decision upon him. He could not risk bringing another, not even a trusted ally like Professor Snape, into this specific darkness. The Horcruxes were a poison, and to know of them was to become a target. He chose to work alone, a solitary guardian bearing a terrible secret, because the cost of companionship, should it be lost, was one he could no longer bear to pay. Every clue was a race against the steady march of Voldemort's influence, and the slow, inevitable decline of his own strength. Then, a breakthrough came from the most unexpected of sources. In the quiet of the Hogwarts kitchens, a deeply troubled house elf named Hoki shared a fragmented memory of her former master, the enigmatic Hepzibah Smith. She spoke of a locket and a cup, objects of great beauty that her mistress had prized above all others. The description of the locket, in particular with its serpentine S, sent a cold clarity through Albus. It was not merely an antique, it was a relic of Salazar Slytherin himself. This was the vital lead he needed, a tangible thread in a web of shadows. It confirmed his darkest fears and set him on a path toward a confrontation that would demand not just wisdom and power, but a willingness to sacrifice everything to mend a tear in the very fabric of life. The cave was a gash of blackness in the cliff face, a place where the sea itself seemed to whisper warnings. Albus Dumbledore stood at its entrance, the weight of his years and his mission pressing down upon him. He knew what lay within was not merely a test of magic, but of spirit. To retrieve the locket, he would have to pass through a series of ancient and terrible defenses, a gauntlet designed to break the will of any who sought its treasure. The first challenge was one of blood, a literal price of entry that required a voluntary offering to part the invisible barrier. It was a dark echo of the pact he had made so long ago, another vow sealed in life's essence. Beyond it lay a vast black lake, its waters unnaturally still and cold, holding a secret army of the dead in fairy, resting just beneath the surface. In the center of that dark water, a single beam of greenish light illuminated a stone basin, and within that basin, swirling with a malevolent energy, was the emerald potion. It did not merely block the locket, it protected it with a magic that could not be vanished, banished, or transfigured. It had to be drunk, every last drop. He turned to Harry, his young companion, his voice calm, but leaving no room for argument. He explained the nature of the enchantment, that he would be forced to relive his worst memories, to endure a suffering not of the body, but of the soul. And then he began to drink. The effect was immediate and horrifying. This was no ordinary poison. It was a psychological torment, a forced march through the corridors of his own deepest regrets. He cried out, not in pain, but in anguish, speaking names and phrases from a summer long past, his body trembling with a grief that seemed to physically weigh him down. Harry held the goblet, his own face a mask of horror and helplessness, forced to pour the terrible liquid past the headmaster's lips until the basin was empty. The physical consequence was devastating. Albus collapsed, his strength utterly spent, his magic so depleted he could not even summon a flame to light the darkness. He was vulnerable, more so than he had been in decades. It was in this moment of profound weakness that the guardians of the lake made their move. The water churned as pale, skeletal hands broke the surface, followed by the silent, shuffling forms of the inferi. They moved with a single, mindless purpose, to drag the intruders down into the cold, eternal dark. Albus, too weak to stand, could only watch as they closed in. He had one final reserve of power, one last, desperate act. He used the very last of his energy to conjure a ring of fire, a protective barrier that held the creatures at bay. But he could not sustain it, and he could not move. He looked at Harry, his eyes clear despite his exhaustion, and gave a simple, crucial instruction. He had to trust the boy completely, to rely on his strength and his courage for their escape. Harry, understanding the terrible stakes, did not hesitate. He supported the weakened wizard, helping him back to the boat, the fiery barrier, their only shield against the grasping hands. They escaped the cave with the locket, but the cost was etched into Albus's ashen face and trembling hands. The mission was a success, but the victory felt hollow. As they moved away from the terrible darkness, the fake locket, a cold, mocking weight in his pocket, Albus knew the final confrontation was now inevitable. He had sacrificed a part of his own life force, not for the true Horcrux, but for a cruel trick, and in doing so, he had bound Harry Potter even closer to a path that would demand everything. The cold air of the Astronomy Tower bit deeper than any winter chill. Albus Dumbledore stood cornered, his power finally spent, his body weakened from the terrible potion in the cave. He was not facing a stranger, but a young man trembling with a task too heavy for his soul. Draco Malfoy's wand hand shook, his face a portrait of fear, not hatred. Albus spoke to him not as an enemy, but as a frightened boy, his voice gentle and pleading, offering protection, offering a way out. He knew this moment was not truly about Draco. The real confrontation was waiting in the shadows. When Severus Snape finally stepped onto the tower, his face was a mask of cold stone, but his eyes held a storm of conflicted loyalty. Albus looked at him, and in that single, silent glance, a final request was made. He did not plead for his life, but for Severus to fulfill a terrible promise. The words were clear, a quiet and deliberate instruction. Avada Kedavra. The flash of green light that erupted from Severus' wand was not an act of murder, but the final, planned piece of a long and painful strategy. It was a sacrifice, willingly made. In that shattering instant, Albus Dumbledore accepted his death as the necessary cost to protect Draco's soul from an irreversible stain, and to ensure that their master plan, the hunt for the Horcruxes, could continue. His internal conflict, the lifelong struggle between his personal desires and the needs of the greater good, was resolved not in a battle, but in a moment of supreme surrender. He had chosen the world over himself. As the curse took him, a blinding white light enveloped the tower, and for a single, peaceful moment, all pain was gone. The consequence of this act was immediate and profound. The weight of the Wizarding War, the entire fate of their world, now fell from the old wizard's shoulders and settled onto those of the young boy hidden below. A burden and a destiny that Harry Potter would now have to carry forward alone. The great hall was filled not with the usual chatter of students, but with a profound and respectful silence. Wizards and witches from every corner of the world had gathered, their brightly colored robes a stark contrast to the somber mood. Albus Dumbledore's final resting place was a white marble tomb beside the lake, a permanent part of the castle he had loved so dearly. Yet his physical absence created a chilling emptiness that extended far beyond the school grounds. The Ministry of Magic, already weakened by infiltration and fear, now seemed to teeter without his quiet, guiding influence. A dangerous power vacuum had opened, and into that void rushed a fresh wave of terror as Voldemort's forces grew bolder. For his friends and allies, the grief was a heavy cloak, but it was woven with threads of his teachings. They remembered his lessons on the power of love, the importance of choice, and the strength found in unity. Mourning was not enough, they realized. Honoring his legacy required action. This shared understanding forged a new resolve, turning their individual sorrow into a collective purpose. His sacrifice became the anchor for their courage, the reason they would stand firm when everything seemed lost. In the days that followed, his portrait appeared in the headmaster's office. It did not speak at first, but simply watched the comings and goings with a familiar, knowing twinkle in its painted eyes. That small, silent detail offered a strange comfort, a reminder that his wisdom was not entirely gone from the world. It was a symbol that his plans were still in motion, and that the fight for the light, though now leaderless, was far from over. The emotional stakes for every student and order member had never been higher, their personal loss now inextricably linked to the fate of the entire wizarding world. How would they find the strength to carry on without their greatest protector? The painted eyes of Albus Dumbledore held the same familiar twinkle, a small but vital point of light in the darkening headmaster's office. For Professor McGonagall, his portrait was not a simple memorial, it was a quiet council chamber. In the first terrible months after his passing, when fear seemed to seep from the castle's very stones, she would often stand before the frame, her hands clasped tightly. She spoke of the Carrows, the new professors who taught dark arts and cruelty with equal fervor, and of the students who were disappearing for detention and returning with a new, hollow look in their eyes. The portrait did not offer easy solutions or grand speeches. Instead, it would offer a single, softly spoken question, a gentle nudge toward a path she had already considered. You remember the charm Flitwick uses to mend the suits of armor, do you not? It is remarkably versatile for reinforcing other, more fragile things, like a classroom door. Or perhaps, I have always found that a well-timed prefect meeting can redirect a great deal of youthful energy away from trouble. His guidance was a tapestry of subtle suggestions, each thread meant to strengthen the resolve of the staff and protect the students without provoking an outright confrontation that would lead to more suffering. This created a quiet, internal conflict for the painted Albus. He possessed the knowledge to directly command, to dictate a precise strategy against the occupying forces. Yet he understood that true strength could not be gifted, it had to be built. His role was not to lead the resistance himself, but to be the steady hand on the tiller, guiding others to discover the courage within themselves. He watched with a proud, aching heart as Neville Longbottom revived Dumbledore's army from a whisper in the corridors, transforming scared students into a network of defiant hope. The portrait offered no direct praise, only a murmured observation about how the resilience of certain magical plants is often underestimated until they bloom in the harshest conditions. He intervened directly only once, when Severus Snape, performing his own dangerous double role, stood before the portrait, his face a mask of exhaustion and despair. The message was not a question, but a clear, solemn instruction. The sword, Severus. It must find its way to him, but he cannot be given it. He must prove himself worthy of claiming it. This single, crucial intervention ensured the final piece of his plan slid silently into place. From his golden frame, Albus Dumbledore watched over his school, a silent guardian steering the final battle from beyond the grave, his greatest lesson being that even in death, a true teacher's work is never truly done. The world had dissolved into a soft, white light, a quiet station of the soul that was both nowhere and everywhere. Albus Dumbledore stood waiting, no longer burdened by the pains of his aging body, his hands clean and whole. This was not the King's Cross of London, but a place of profound stillness, a pause between one breath and the next. When Harry appeared, confused and seemingly alone, Albus felt a wave of tenderness and regret so deep, it threatened to shatter the very peace of this place. He had guided this boy like a chess piece, preparing him for a sacrifice he himself had been too cowardly to make in his own youth. Here, in this final, quiet moment, there could be no more secrets, no more carefully laid plans. Only the truth. He began with his family, with Ariana, his voice soft with a grief that had not faded with death. He confessed his arrogance, his neglect, his terrible failure to protect her, a mistake that had haunted every decision he had ever made. He spoke of the greater good, not as a political philosophy, but as the arrogant fantasy of a brilliant young man who believed he knew better than everyone else. He admitted to Harry that his love for the boy had made his task all the more painful, that sending him to the Dursleys, placing him in danger, and knowing the final price he would have to pay were the heaviest burdens of his long life. Every word was an apology, not for the sake of his own soul, which was already here in this peaceful limbo, but for Harry's understanding. This confession was the final piece of the puzzle, the context that made sense of every hardship, every loss, every seemingly cruel twist of fate. He was giving Harry the one thing he had always withheld, the complete and unvarnished truth. In doing so, he was resolving the boy's deepest conflicts, answering the why that had echoed through every difficult choice. Why had he been left in the dark? Why had he been asked to bear so much? The answer was not in a grand design, but in the flawed, painful choices of a man who had learned wisdom through terrible error. By being completely honest, Albus was offering Harry the clarity to make his own choice, free from manipulation or obligation. The stakes of the entire Wizarding War, the fate of every living soul, hung on this quiet moment of understanding between a dead mentor and his living pupil. When Harry asked if this was real or just happening inside his head, Albus's answer held the warmth of his final, and perhaps greatest, lesson. Of course it is happening inside your head, Harry, but why on earth should that mean it is not real? With those words, he gave Harry permission to trust his own heart, his own love, as the most powerful magic of all. He watched as Harry, with newfound resolve, turned his back on the peace of this place and chose to return to the pain and the fight, not because he was told to, but because he now understood it was the right thing to do. Albus Dumbledore was finally, completely at peace, his long atonement complete in the eyes of the boy he had raised for death and who had instead chosen life. The final battle's echoes faded, leaving behind a quiet that felt both fragile and full of promise. In the weeks and months that followed, as the wizarding world began the slow work of mending its broken foundations, the name Albus Dumbledore was spoken not with grief, but with a newfound clarity. His life's work, a tapestry woven with threads of profound error and even more profound atonement, had ensured that a new era of peace could finally begin. This outcome, this hard-won peace, was the ultimate consequence of every choice he had ever made, from the arrogant summer in Godric's Hollow to the weary climb up the Astronomy Tower. The long external conflict against dark forces was resolved not by a single hero, but by a chain of events he had helped set in motion, a legacy of sacrifice that empowered others to finish what he started. His story, in all its complexity, now forced the wizarding world to make a decision. Would they learn from his example? The stakes were no longer about survival, but about the kind of future they would build together. His portrait in the headmaster's office, watched as the ministry was restaffed with those who valued tolerance over blood purity, as werewolf rites were debated with compassion, and as Hogwarts itself became a living monument to his core belief that our choices, far more than our abilities, show who we truly are. Parents who had lived through both wars told their children stories of the wise old wizard with a twinkling eye, ensuring his philosophies of love, forgiveness, and the power of second chances were passed down like heirlooms. The greatest tribute to his complicated life was not a statue or a named award, but the quiet, everyday courage of ordinary witches and wizards who chose understanding over suspicion and community over isolation. His legacy lives on every time a student stands up for a friend. Every time a former opponent is offered a hand in reconciliation, and every time someone looks into the darkness and chooses to light a lamp instead of cursing the shadows. The fire in the office grate seemed to burn a little brighter, its warmth a stark contrast to the chilling memory Albus had just shared from the cave. He looked across his desk at the young boy with the lightning scar, a child who carried a weight no one should ever have to bear. The time had come to give Harry the one weapon Voldemort could never comprehend, let alone defeat. It was not a spell or a potion, but a simple, profound truth. You were protected by a magic far older and infinitely more powerful than any I have ever studied, Albus said, his voice soft but unwavering. It was love, Harry, your mother's love. He explained how Lily Potter's conscious choice to die, her refusal to step aside, had woven a shield of ancient and sacrificial magic around her son. This was not a charm that could be learned, or a force that could be wielded with a wand. It was a power that activated only at the moment of ultimate selflessness, a protection born from the very heart of human connection. This single, deliberate act created the foundational conflict of their age, a battle between two irreconcilable philosophies. On one side stood Voldemort, who saw love as a useless, Muggle-born sentiment, a foolish weakness to be scorned and eliminated. On the other stood the simple, unbreakable bond between a mother and her child, a force so potent it could rebuke the killing curse itself. By choosing to be completely open about this magic, Albus was doing more than just sharing a piece of history. He was fortifying Harry's very soul. He was giving the boy a reason to trust in his own heart, to see the scar on his forehead not as a mark of death, but as a testament to a love that had literally defied it. The stakes for Harry's personal journey shifted in that moment from a vague destiny to a tangible understanding. He began to see that his greatest power did not lie in being the boy who lived, but in his capacity to love and to be loved in return. A profound connection settled between the old wizard and the young boy, a silent acknowledgement that they were now partners in a war where the most powerful magic was not taught in any classroom, but lived in every courageous and caring choice. The polished stone floor of the forgotten classroom felt cold beneath his knees. Albus had discovered the mirror by chance, a towering, ornate frame hidden beneath a dusty sheet. At first, he thought it was a simple scrying glass, but the image that shimmered into view was not the reflection of the room behind him. It was his family. His father was there, not in Azkaban, his face warm and proud. His mother stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, her smile free from the strain of their difficult life. And between them stood Ariana, her eyes clear and bright, her magic calm and whole within her. They were together, happy and untouched by any shadow. The sight was so beautiful, it was a physical ache in his chest, a perfect world just beyond the glass. He did not merely glance, he fell into the vision, losing hours, then entire nights, seated before the mirror, his own lonely reflection ignored for the breathtaking fiction within. This was his heart's desire, made manifest, and the temptation to lose himself in it was overwhelming. The conflict this created was a quiet war inside him. Each visit to the mirror was a surrender to a wistful dream, a temporary balm for his profound grief. Yet each time he finally pulled himself away, returning to the silent, painful reality of his home, the contrast was devastating. The mirror was not a comfort. He realized with a dawning horror, it was a poison. It offered a perfect, unattainable past, but it demanded his present and his future in return. He was staring into a world that could never be, and in doing so, he was neglecting the brother and sister who were living, breathing, and needing him in the world that was. The personal stakes were his very will to move forward. Could he continue to live in the harsh light of truth, or would he choose to slowly fade away in the beautiful lie of the mirror's glow? His decision, when it came, was not made in a single moment of drama, but through a gradual, painful accumulation of resolve. One evening, as he looked from his smiling mother in the glass to the empty chair she had left in their sitting room, he understood the true danger. The mirror showed him nothing but what he already possessed, a deep and abiding love for his family, but twisted into a form that prevented him from acting on that love in the real world. To honor them, he had to live for them, not dream of them. With a final, longing look, he turned his back on the enchanting image, choosing the difficult reality of his responsibilities over the seductive fantasy of his desires. He covered the mirror once more, leaving its temptation behind in the darkness. It was a quiet victory, but a crucial one, teaching him that some of the most powerful magic does not come from a wand, but from the strength to accept a painful truth and continue walking forward. The firelight caught the silver threads in his beard as Albus leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. A dozen young faces, illuminated by the flickering flames, leaned in with him, their usual restlessness completely forgotten. He told them of 3 brothers, clever and powerful, who cheated death itself by bridging a treacherous river with a wave of their wands. Death, cunning and offended, offered each a prize for their skill. The first brother, a warrior, asked for a wand more powerful than any other, a wand that could not be defeated. The second, an arrogant man, desired the power to recall others from the grave. But the third brother, the humblest and wisest of them all, asked for something that would allow him to leave that place without being followed by death. As he spoke, Albus did not merely recite a story, he conjured it. His hands shaped the air, his voice becoming the rushing river, the hollow pride of the first brother, the desperate grief of the second. He made them see the wand, the stone, the cloak, not as simple magical objects, but as choices made flesh. He lingered on the first brother's boastful victory and his subsequent defeat at the hands of a thief, his power stolen along with his life. He painted the second brother's heartbreaking reunion with a lost love, a shade who did not belong in the living world, and his eventual descent into despair. Here, Albus paused, his eyes sweeping over the captivated students. He saw in their faces the same dangerous allure he had once felt, the seductive whisper that power could master anything, even the natural order of life itself. He could have glorified the Elder Wand, could have spoken of its legendary invincibility with a spark of that old, hungry curiosity, but he did not. His decision was deliberate and profound. He chose instead to emphasize the quiet journey of the third brother, the brother who lived a long and full life, who greeted death in the end, not as an enemy, but as an old friend. He guided their young minds away from the thrill of conquest and toward the quiet strength of acceptance. The stakes of this simple bedtime story were far greater than any of them realized. He was not just telling a tale, he was planting a seed, a moral compass for the difficult choices they would one day have to make. When the final words were spoken, a deep, thoughtful silence filled the room. The only sound was the gentle crackle of the fire. The children were not just entertained, they were transformed, each one quietly considering what they would ask for if they ever met death on a lonely bridge, and what price they would be willing to pay. The ministry's official pronouncements declared a state of unwavering peace, but Albus Dumbledore could feel the lie in the very air. In the quiet of his study, he made a decision that would place him in direct opposition to the government he had once been offered to lead. He would not wait for permission to protect their world. The Order of the Phoenix, a name whispered during a previous war, would rise again from the ashes of secrecy. His first task was not to gather an army, but to weave a web of absolute trust. He reached out not to powerful officials, but to a collection of the most steadfast hearts he knew, from the gruff but loyal groundskeeper, Hagrid, to the brilliant and fierce Auror, Alastor Moody. Each invitation was a quiet conversation, a shared understanding of the danger, and a mutual pledge to stand against the coming darkness. Their headquarters became a hidden sanctuary, protected by a magic so profound it could only be offered by a soul's deepest loyalty. The house at number 12, Grimmauld Place, materialized from the London mist, a testament to the ancient, unbreakable bonds of family magic. Within its walls, the Resistance was born. Maps were spread across tables, tracking strange disappearances and ominous signs. Information was shared in hushed tones, a quiet counterpoint to the ministry's loud denials. This deliberate choice to operate outside the law created a constant, simmering tension. How could they convince a frightened public of a threat their own government refused to name? Every mission, undertaken by an Order member, was a tightrope walk between vigilance and exposure. A simple act of surveillance, watching a known Death Eater's home, could end in an ambush. Delivering a warning to a Muggle-born family risked leading the enemy directly to their door. The stakes for every single member were not just about victory or defeat. They were about returning home alive. Albus carried the weight of each decision, knowing that his strategic necessity placed the lives of his most loyal friends on the line every single day. He was no longer just a headmaster or a mentor. He was the quiet general of a secret war, building a shield of loyalty and courage where the official shields had utterly failed. The Goblet of Fire's eerie blue flame had settled back into a soft, contained flicker, but the name it had spat into the stunned silence still hung in the air of the Great Hall. Harry Potter. Albus Dumbledore's request for the boy to come forward was calm, yet beneath that steady tone, a silent alarm was screaming. As headmaster and a judge, his primary duty was the safety of every champion, a duty that had just been violated in the most public way imaginable. He immediately fortified the tournament's safeguards, layering ancient protective charms around the champions that even the other judges were not fully aware of. His public face was one of controlled authority, but his private investigation began that very night. How had a powerful magical object, bound by an unbreakable contract, been so thoroughly deceived? This was not a simple case of a student's ambition. This was a plot of immense cunning. The external conflict was no longer just about navigating dangerous tasks. It was a quiet war against a hidden enemy, manipulating the tournament from within. He found himself increasingly at odds with the official narrative presented by Barty Crouch Sr., a man whose rigid adherence to procedure seemed to be masking a deep, personal terror. The stakes of this conflict escalated with each task. During the Dragon Challenge, his eyes were not on the spectacle, but on the shadows of the enclosure, watching for any sign of outside interference. At the bottom of the Black Lake, he had charmed a personal monitoring charm to pulse softly against his wrist, a private tether to the champion's vital signs, his breath held until all 4 signals returned to the surface. By the time the final task arrived, the maze of towering hedges seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy under the twilight sky. The air itself felt thick with deception. As the champions disappeared into the green, twisting corridors, Dumbledore made a crucial decision. He chose to trust the gnawing instinct in his gut over the reassuring appearances of official protocol. He quietly stationed the most trusted members of the Order around the perimeter, their presence unknown to the celebrating crowd. He knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was no longer a school competition. It was a trap, meticulously laid, and the final, terrible act of Voldemort's return was about to begin just beyond the enchanted hedges. The journal lay open on his desk, its pages a quiet testament to a mind forever untangling the threads of magical history. Albus Dumbledore had finally pieced together the bloody lineage of the Elder Wand, tracing its path of conquest from one violent master to the next. Its power was a siren song that had lured countless wizards to their doom, a cycle of dominance that seemed impossible to break. To simply possess it was to paint a target on one's back for all eternity. A radical, almost unthinkable solution began to form in his mind, a plan so clever it bordered on the paradoxical. He would orchestrate his own defeat. He would arrange for Severus Snape to strike the killing blow, not in true combat, but as the final move in a long and painful strategy. By dying undefeated, by planning his own end, he could sever the wand's terrible lineage forever. Its legendary power would die with him, rendered inert, a myth with no more teeth. This created a profound conflict within him, a quiet debate that filled the silent hours of the night. Was it right to use the ultimate symbol of magical dominance, an object steeped in so much suffering, to achieve a noble end? He was, in essence, employing the weapon of a tyrant to ensure no tyrant could ever wield it again. The decision he reached was one of supreme self-mastery. He would be the wand's master, yes, but he would never allow himself to be mastered by it. He would not use it to conquer or to rule. His sole purpose in claiming its allegiance was to become its final, quiet guardian, the one who would take its secret to his grave. The stakes for this plan were nothing less than the future balance of magical power itself. If he succeeded, the most dangerous object in existence would become a mere curiosity, its threat extinguished not by a great battle, but by a greater sacrifice. He confided this intricate, dangerous scheme only to the pages of his private journal, a solitary record of a choice that would forever alter the course of magical history, a final, brilliant stroke to protect the world from the very kind of power he had once been so tempted to pursue. The gentle weight of Fawkes on his shoulder was a familiar comfort, a warmth that seeped through his robes and into his weary bones. Albus sat in his study, the day's political maneuverings and whispered fears finally silenced, the only sound the soft crackle of the fire and his own quiet breath. Then Fawkes began to sing. It was not a loud or triumphant song, but a low, soothing melody that seemed to vibrate in the very air, a current of pure, calm magic that wrapped around the room. Albus did not try to analyze the magic or decipher the notes. He simply closed his eyes and listened, allowing the serene sound to wash over him, feeling the tangled knots of worry and responsibility within him slowly begin to loosen. In that shared silence, there were no grand plans to make, no difficult choices to weigh. There was only the present moment, a rare island of peace in a sea of constant demand. This conscious decision to be still, to accept this simple gift without question, was itself a profound act of replenishment. It reminded him that his strength was not an infinite well, but a resource that needed these quiet moments to refill. The personal stakes of his role were immense, for if his own well of compassion ran dry, how could he possibly offer wisdom or comfort to others? The Phoenix's song, a magic built on renewal and loyalty, was the perfect antidote to the draining nature of his responsibilities. As the final, haunting note faded into the firelight, a deep, settled calm remained. The internal conflicts of the day had not been solved, but they had been put into perspective, their sharp edges softened by this simple act of companionship. He felt a quiet resilience settle back into his spirit, a readiness to meet whatever challenges the dawn would bring, not with frantic energy, but with the steady, replenished heart of a man who understood the necessity of stillness. The cold air of the Astronomy Tower bit deeper than any winter chill. Albus Dumbledore stood cornered, his power finally spent, his body weakened from the terrible potion in the cave. He was not facing a stranger, but a young man trembling with a task too heavy for his soul. Draco Malfoy's wand hand shook, his face a portrait of fear, not hatred. Albus spoke to him not as an enemy, but as a frightened boy, his voice gentle and pleading, offering protection, offering a way out. He knew this moment was not truly about Draco. The real confrontation was waiting in the shadows. When Severus Snape finally stepped onto the tower, his face was a mask of cold stone, but his eyes held a storm of conflicted loyalty. Albus looked at him, and in that single, silent glance, a final request was made. He did not plead for his life, but for Severus to fulfill a terrible promise. The words were clear, a quiet and deliberate instruction. The flash of green light that erupted from Severus' wand was not an act of murder, but the final, planned piece of a long and painful strategy. It was a sacrifice, willingly made. In that shattering instant, Albus Dumbledore accepted his death as the necessary cost to protect Draco's soul from an irreversible stain, and to ensure that their master plan, the hunt for the Horcruxes, could continue. His internal conflict, the lifelong struggle between his personal desires and the needs of the greater good, was resolved not in a battle, but in a moment of supreme surrender. He had chosen the world over himself. As the curse took him, a blinding white light enveloped the tower, and for a single, peaceful moment, all pain was gone. The consequence of this act was immediate and profound. The weight of the Wizarding War, the entire fate of their world, now fell from the old wizard's shoulders and settled onto those of the young boy hidden below, a burden and a destiny that Harry Potter would now have to carry forward alone. The portrait in the headmaster's office does not simply hang on the wall, it listens. A soft, knowing smile rests on the painted face of Albus Dumbledore, a quiet testament to a journey that stretched from a boy's desperate ambition to a wizard's final, willing sacrifice. His legacy is not carved in marble or written in history books alone. It lives in the very air of the castle, in the peaceful corridors where students now learn without the shadow of fear, in the simple, profound safety he helps secure for all who call the wizarding world home. His story is a map of a soul, a demonstration that our greatest growth often springs from our most difficult reckonings. He taught us that wisdom is not the absence of error, but the courage to learn from it, and that true power is found not in dominating others, but in the strength to master one's own heart. The choices he made, both brilliant and flawed, echo in every lesson about love, loyalty, and the enduring fight for what is right. Though his portrait may not speak often, his wisdom continues to guide those who seek it, a gentle, steady presence for every new generation that passes through the ancient stone archway. The quiet, constant hum of Hogwarts itself, with its shifting staircases and whispering portraits, ensures that his story is never truly finished, but is instead retold in the lives of every student who learns that it is our choices, far more than our abilities, that show who we truly are.
you.